Only, if you're so great, then how come you can't practice anymore? If you're so great, how come you're here at my funeral home, using my equipment, instead of the other way around? I can't practice anymore because I broke too many stupid laws, said Ugo. They thought they could make me change my funeral philosophy. Tonight, I am vindicated. Colchester snorted. I heard you got banned because you let some mother hold her dead baby and she went crazy because of it, said Colchester. Ugo lowered his eyes. I also heard you got banned because you didn't stop some woman from climbing into the cremation chamber with her husband, said Colchester. You just calmly sat there and watched a grown woman burn herself alive. Ugo reached out to the embalming table to steady himself. His hand hit his scalpel as he groped, and it went skittering across the cold concrete floor, turning around in a slow circle until it came to a stop. Colchester picked it up and brandished it at Ugo. Be careful, said Colchester. Get out of here, said Ugo. Bring me the things on the list. I will call you when I need you. Crazy maniac, whispered Colchester, slipping out of the room and leaving him alone with the dead man. Ugo blew out a deep sigh and sat for a few moments in silence. Finally, he put his hands on the dead man's face. He pinched and prodded. Franklin Pollywell Jr. did not look peaceful in death. He looked sad and scared. His eyebrows curled downward at his temples, and there were worry lines across his flat, pale brow. His blue lips were thin and cruel. He was young, only in his early 20s, but he looked ancient, wise, and corrupt. You do not look like your sisters, said Ugo. Franklin Pollywell Jr. said nothing. How would you like to breathe again? Asked Ugo. Ugo hummed to himself as he cut into Franklin Pollywell Jr.'s back with a power saw. Colchester watched, mesmerized, furiously scratching notes into a marble composition book. Why are you cutting through the back? Asked Colchester. Ugo turned the power saw off and raised the safety goggles to his forehead. What? Why aren't you cutting into his lungs from the front? I have to go in through the back so we can get the tubes in without bunching, said Ugo. If we go in through the front, we will ruin the lines of his suit, and you will see the wires. Genius, said Colchester. The compressor will be radio-controlled, said Ugo. It is easy enough to do, and we have no budget restrictions. But the compressor could also be operated with a manual bellows or a hand crank if money was tight. With enough hose, you could do the pumping from the other room so no one would see. Slow down, said Colchester, writing so fast that blobs of ink matted the page and darkened the sides of his hand. We simulate inhalation with the compressor, and then we provide actual exhalation with the clamps and the canvas bag, see? Squeezing a bag that said Hammerschmidt Chemicals on the side. He breathes! If we used Franklin Jr.'s actual lungs, we would risk a puncture at a critical moment. The lungs must be replaced with these synthetics. We were creating an illusion, and it must be perfect to be effective. Every human being can tell the difference between life and death by instinct. To make a dead man appear alive to his own father is the height of human artifice and the apex of funeral craft. It is a scandal, shrieked Colchester. It changes everything. You will be a millionaire. No, said Ugo, but I will eat. I will have clothes, and I will look in a mirror and not see a failure. At precisely 6 p.m., Colchester opened the doors to the viewing parlor. The Pollywell family was 6 people deep. There was Frida and Francine, 3 weeping maiden aunts, and Franklin Sr., a thin and haunted man in a wrinkled black suit with big, deep black eyes and a thin wisp of white hair made pink by his inflamed scalp. Franklin Sr. limped into the viewing room and made his way to the front pew with a daughter on either side of him. He collapsed into the hard wooden bench with his stiff legs in front of him, obscenely suspending his black dress shoes in the air. Francine and Frida looked at each other and then grabbed each of his ankles and pushed down, tucking his legs under the pew and resting his feet on the thick red carpet. The 3 maiden aunts followed the Pollywells, each one weeping louder than the next. They spread out in the pews and looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes before bursting into fresh peals of tears at 30-second intervals. Colchester and Ugo stood in the back of the room and waited, but no one else came. Finally, Colchester shut the doors and sat down at the pipe organ. Ugo stood next to him and peered at the corpse across the room, waiting for the moment of crisis when the fever soars highest before breaking. Franklin Polywell Jr. lay in quiet repose in his black oak coffin, dressed in a clean white suit, rouged and coiffed, and no longer looking as corrupt or as wise. The coffin was varnished to a bright shine, and there was a red spray of roses across the trunk. Franklin Sr. stared at his son without seeing him, as his two daughters nervously clutched each of his arms. Finally, Francine turned around in her seat and narrowed her eyes at Ugo. Ugo shook his head slightly, and Francine turned back around, glaring and muttering. "Not yet," whispered Ugo. But he removed the radio control from his pocket. There were three buttons. A blue button, a green button, and a black button. Colchester began to play the pipe organ. After 15 minutes of somber music, Franklin Polywell Sr. stood up and smacked his lips. "I hate funerals," said Franklin Polywell Sr. "Let's all go get some hamburgers. Junior loves hamburgers, don't he?" "Junior is dead, Dad," said Francine. "Can't you see that? Can't you understand?" "Nonsense," said Franklin Sr. "He's just hungry, ain't you, Junior?" Franklin Sr. stepped closer to the casket and ran his hand along his brow. Both Frida and Francine turned around to look at Ugo now. Ugo considered, and then he pushed the blue button. Franklin Polywell Jr.'s left arm flopped out of the coffin and began to twitch, hanging loosely over the sides. "That is a good stiff piece of wire," said Colchester. "Look at it. Perfectly realistic." "Be quiet," said Ugo. "Look," said Franklin Sr. "His arm's moving. He's not dead. It's a mistake, you see." "Don't be crazy, Dad," said Francine nervously. "He's already been involved. He's dead, and you have to move on." "His arm's twitching," said Franklin Sr. laughing. "Can't you see? You're the one who can't accept it. He's fine. He'll just need some physical therapy and some extra love and attention. He'll be fine. Huh, look at him. He's twitching away like a junkie in the snow." "Pay attention, John. You're my executor." Indeed, Franklin Jr.'s cold gray arm goosed beside the casket like an elephant's trunk searching for peanuts. Franklin Sr. cackled and fell to his knees, pointing at it. You see, he shouted. The maiden aunts were each swooning in a different way. One was screaming to the Lord Jesus to come and take her away. Another was belching out graceless sobs. And the third was rolling round in her pew as if buffeted by winds. Franklin Sr. got up off his knees and walked to the casket's edge. He peered into his son's dead face. "Hey, wake up," he shouted. He poked at Franklin Jr. in the chest. "Wake up, come on," he shouted again. Ugo pushed the green button. Franklin Polywell Jr. began to breathe. It was a trick, a ruse, a conflation of taxidermy, pneumatics, and legerdemain. But anyone looking on couldn't help but believe. Junior's chest began to rise and fall, and he began to expel cold puffs of air from his lipsticked, lifeless lips. His breath smelled like camphor, and it rustled Franklin Sr.'s hair in quiet waves. With the twitching in his left arm, and the breathing,